Is it really worth climbing the corporate ladder and getting that next position where you're making a bit more money? Or is it not worth it at all? And should you just stay where you're currently at in your job? So I want to tell you my personal story about a job that I worked at a couple of years ago. I was working at a dollar store position, and pretty much every single position that I've worked, I've noticed this exact thing happen with people who went up and got like a higher position. When they ranked up to go from like employee to like assistant manager or something like that. Pretty much every single person that I've seen go up, they experience this exact same thing. So when I was working at this dollar store position a couple years ago, I worked there for about 4 years, right? That job was within walking distance of where I lived at the time. I was living with my mom at the time. Now I currently live by myself, but at the time I was living, at my parents' place, and I would walk to work. So I didn't really have like a car payment or anything like that. So it was pretty nice. I had a lot more, I guess you could say, breathing room. And during this time, I was also focusing on ways of like making money online. So I was testing out a bunch of different like online side hustles to see if I could, make money without relying fully on like a 9 to 5 job, because I knew very early on, even like when I was like 19 years old, that university was a scam. Going to university meant that you are likely going to get 6 figures in debt without the guarantee of the actual position that you went for. And most people that I know that go to university, they end up in a worse position compared to those who just work regular jobs and just do the 40-hour work week. So yeah, I knew very early on that, neither university or climbing the corporate ladder would really work for me. But, I started working at this position, and 3 out of the 4 years that I worked there, I was working just as a normal cashier. So just the regular, worker that you get, the regular position you get when you first get hired at one of these stores is you just ring people up. And then after that, when there's not customers in line, then you are just basically stocking shelves for the most part, or you're like making the aisles look nice. And if you've worked any retail position, then you've likely done that type of work as well. And but with dollar store positions, they're a lot more stressful because there's typically only like 2 or 3 people working the entire store on a given day. So compared to a regular grocery store where you get hired as a cashier, for example, typically you are just at the register all day, and then you have the people coming up in line, you scan their items, and either you have someone bagging the items before, but now it's mainly just like the cashier does that, and then they bag the items, and then now they have like the self-checkout lanes happening, as well. So the bagging position doesn't really exist anymore, at least from what I've seen. But the previous position that I had before that, I was like bagging items. That was like my first job that I had. But at this position, I was working as a cashier, and then there was like 2 assistant managers usually, and then like one like main manager, like the store manager that runs the whole store. And then they usually make a little bit more than the assistant managers, and the assistant managers usually make more than the actual cashiers. So the biggest downside about that job, and pretty much dollar stores in general, Family Dollar, Dollar Tree, Dollar General, Family Dollar being the one that I worked at, workers are pretty much doing all the jobs, right? So you have the cashier, you have to ring people up, and then you also have to stock shelves, and you also have to make sure that the shelves look nice. And so when the day gets really busy, the unfortunate thing is you likely don't have as much time to get all the items stocked. And I remember there were many days where I would be like trying to go as quick as I can. I would be taking like energy shots as well to try and like run back and forth and get everything stocked up. But on a lot of the days that I worked, I was not able to get everything stocked fully because I was stuck on the register and I was like the only cashier available. And so then the next day I would go into work and I would basically get yelled at by the manager, working at the time, saying that I wasn't working hard enough and I need to pick up the pace. And that was like a recurring theme that happens. And so it wasn't just myself that got yelled at, but pretty much every single, employee that worked there all went through that same exact thing as well. And so as a result, that company had a very high turnover rate because people, they would either just walk out, they would stop showing up, or they would just quit with no notice and cuss out the manager. And that was something that I noticed very early on. And so as I continued working there, I was like the loyal employee, like the person that, stayed there the longest. And the reason why I stayed there, a lot longer than I should have was just because of the fact that I was within walking distance, and it meant that I could save money on like a car payment. I didn't have to pay for Uber rides. I didn't have to, in most of the jobs that were near me, it was mainly just retail positions that I was able to get. So that dollar store job that I had paid slightly more than the bagging position that I had. But every now and then I would get asked, hey, you've been here for a while. Do you want to become an assistant manager, right? Do you want to make a bit more money being an assistant manager? And for a very long time, I said no. I'm like, I don't want to do that because, I didn't really like fully explain it, but I knew that if I took that offer, I would just deal with more stress. It'd be a lot more responsibilities that I would have to deal with. Sure, I would be making a bit more money, but even from the people who were, managers, they were still struggling to get by. They weren't making that much money to live comfortably on their own, or if they did have their own place, they were living with maybe a roommate or two, and then they were splitting the rent. But, most jobs that in general nowadays don't really pay that much. So when I look at, these higher ups, assistant managers, main managers, even people who are store directors or whatever, they are still barely scraping by and they look miserable. And right. So the store director that would show up every now and then and, kind of grade how the store is doing, she was this very, she was this middle-aged woman. She had this very deep masculine voice, and every single time that I seen her, she just had this natural resting bitch face look. And I remember there was one instance where I was ringing people up, and she was off on the side saying oh, if this store isn't looking nice, the next time I come in here, then there's going to be less employees in the store. She just was super miserable all the time. She didn't look happy. And when I look at these people, these older people who, they stay at the same company for, 10, 20, 30 years, almost all the time, they're miserable. They're not happy working in that position. And I think that everyone watching this video can agree that you don't want to trade all this time just to barely scrape by. And so this is why a lot of young people are, obsessing over things like, making money online, why they're being content with less, because if you, are trying to, live on your own and you're trying to, go the traditional route, you're just going to end up with more unnecessary stress and you're still going to be barely scraping by. So my thought process was, if I am going to need a regular job for the time being, then I would much rather stay the, current position that I'm at now. And if I am going to make any more money, then I'm just going to figure out a way to make money online. So on the side of my 9 to 5, I would be doing things like creating content. I'd be doing a bunch of research into different side hustles, different online business opportunities. I'd be, attending these different webinars. And as I was working that job, I was making a little bit money on this online on the side, doing online marketing. So every now and then I would get, commissions coming in from different products that I was promoting. And that also gave me a reason to not climb up the corporate ladder. Now, after a while of me being there, I worked 3 years as just a normal cashier, making minimum wage at that job. When the main manager that I worked with quit, and she moved away, then there was a different manager who took over, and then a different employee another assistant manager that I became really close friends with, work friends, I guess you could say. And then after a while, he, asked me the same question, hey, do you want to become an assistant manager? And so after a while, I thought, okay, well, I've been here enough. I wouldn't mind getting paid a little bit more. So eventually I took the position, and then I worked my last year there as an assistant manager. So when I got that position, I was making a bit more money. Instead of making $10 an hour, I think I was making maybe $8.25 an hour at the time. And then when I got the assistant manager job, I think I was making $11 or $12 an hour or something like that. And, but it still was barely enough to live comfortably on my own. I was still living with my mom. I didn't really notice that much of a difference on my paycheck every week, even though I was working the same hours, if not more at times, because when someone calls off, then I have to be the person that works extra. And so whenever if there's no other employees available, and if only one person can work, it typically has to be an assistant manager. Like, it can't just be a normal employee, because the managers at that position have to open and close the store, do those types of things. And that's what I would have to do as an assistant manager. So there was one particular day where I had to work a open to close. So from the time that the store opened at 7 a.m., I had to open up the store, and then I had to work the entire day with, I don't even think I took a break. I think maybe I just ate something on the side, while I was working. But there might have been like one employee that day, or I might have been myself the entire day, running the entire store. And then I had to close the store at 10 p.m. So over 10 hours, I was in that store. And by the end of it, I was just super stressed out. And then what made it even worse was the next day I had to go in, open the store again at 7 a.m. And then I had to work until like 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. when the other manager came in. Then he worked a couple hours. And then when I got home that night, I just wanted to relax a bit. And then my manager called me and texted me and said, like, hey, can you come back and work, a couple extra hours, I don't remember what the reason was, but he asked if I can come back, and I'm like, no, I'm not really feeling it right now. I got to get some rest. And then like 30 minutes after, he sends me another text saying like, wow, thanks a lot, because you didn't come back into work, I had to work overtime, and I couldn't watch a movie with my wife, basically. And I remember wanting to like cuss him out and say like, dude, I'm done with this place, so bad. But I ended up not responding to it at all, because I'm like, I don't feel like dealing with this. I just want to relax a bit. Then the next day I worked, I was supposed to close that night. And then my manager had like this doctor's appointment to go to or something like that. So he had me, work that morning. I was texting him something, but he wasn't responding, which I later found out was because, bad cell service where he was at, and he was kind of there all day with his wife for, I don't remember what the reason was, but then I remember he texted me something, and then I just got really mad. I sent this long, angry message saying, I'm like, dude, I'm gonna quit, like, screw this place. And then he said, okay, well, I'll give you a couple days off, and then I ended up doing that, and I ended up staying longer. So yeah, that was what I've experienced when I took that extra position. When I first got that promotion, I remember, family members of mine were saying like, oh, that's awesome. Congratulations. You got the promotion at work. But I didn't see it that way at all. I just was kind of like, it's whatever. And the number one thing that I've learned pretty much in every single position that I've worked is it's almost never worth the work promotion. It's almost never worth getting that raise, because unless if it's something like, unless if it's like a huge difference in pay, like you go from like making, 17 an hour to like, maybe like 30 or something like that, then, maybe in that case it would be worth it. But for the most part, you're only getting like a couple extra bucks per hour. And every single time that I've, met someone that's like, oh, I got this really nice paying job. It pays, really well. It's got good benefits. But it's like, at the end of the day, you are still trading a third of your life just to barely be able to afford life. And with the way the economy is right now, that's the reality for pretty much everyone that's working right now. You work 40 hours a week at a job, you come home, and then you want to rest for a bit, and that leaves you with very little time to do other things, right? Typically you just want to rest, you want to relax, especially if you're doing like a lot of physical labor, and then you go to sleep, you wake up, you do the same thing the next day, and when every day feels the same, what happens as a result is time just flies by faster than ever. So I think the cool thing to do right now is to, instead of climbing up the corporate ladder, climb down the corporate ladder. And the best way of doing that is by being content with making less money at your job, where you are. Maybe maybe you don't like your job right now, but maybe it's comfortable where you're at. But while you're working that position and you're, just a normal worker, you can be finding alternative ways to make money aside from a regular 9-to-5 job. And my best recommendation is to consider starting an online business, either get into content creation, learn digital marketing, learn how to use AI, and all of these things are things you could do to potentially either make more money or escape the 9 to 5 rat race altogether. And that is the best thing that you could do if you want to have a chance at living the American dream. So that is my personal message that I want to put out there. If you are a young person right now, or even if you're an older person and you're just sick of the 9 to 5 grind, the best thing that you could do is invest your free time off the clock very wisely and consider starting something and seeing if you can build up another income stream outside of the 9 to 5 grind. So yeah, that's really the best thing that I could recommend. And even if you, let's say, make, just maybe like $500 a month doing something, and maybe you just decide to work like a day or two less than you normally would, that itself is going to provide you with so much more peace of mind, knowing that your bills are still going to get paid if you're making even just a little bit of income online. And then you have your normal 9 to 5, as a stable income source, right? So I would recommend doing that until you get to a full-time income, doing something online, and then you can have a lot more free time, flexibility, and just peace of mind altogether. So that's the message I want to put out there in this video. If you want to learn more about what I do, feel free to subscribe to this channel, and you could check out some of the other videos that I have. Otherwise, you could check out the link down below if you want to learn more in depth about what I do specifically. So take care and see you in the next one.